Hello again, this is Preheat. Welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. Today we're going to be talking about Frost Mage again, and this is going to be the Frost Mage version that is currently live as of May 7th, so this is going to be 12.0.5 Frost Mage. There's like some slight changes that Blizzard has made. It seems like Frost Mage is the only spec of Mage that Blizzard's really acknowledging right now, so it's the only one really getting updates. But we do need to talk about it again because a lot of stuff has changed. Today's sponsor is World of Sea Battle. If you enjoy MMOs or are looking for a change of pace, World of Sea Battle is a free-to-play, open-world MMORPG set in the age of sailing where instead of building a character, you're building out your fleet. You can go run missions, trade, go hunt other players in PvP by going full pirate. There's over 50 ships, all customizable, and a lot of different build options depending on how you want to play. If you like tweaking setups and optimizing things, there's definitely a lot of depth here. Gearing up is quick, and it's a great game to jump into when you're just looking to blow off some steam by sailing the seas. As an old school World of Warcraft player, I find the community aspect of this game to be pretty cool. Depending on which faction you join, you can find guilds and recruiting on Reddit and other sites. And guilds fight over entire regions, so there's a feeling of meaningfulness whenever you work as a team to hold the territory. If you don't like PvP, there's a lot of other options in the game, but I will say joining a pirate guild is a lot of fun. The game just got a new update with a lot of new ships, classes, abilities, and a whole new win system, quests, and even fishing. So if you want to check it out, it's free on PC through Steam or through their official site. Use the link in the description. There is a limited time offer to jumpstart your adventure. You get 5 days of the Captain's Seal for 40% more EXP and gold, and you also get 6 extra ship slots if you use my link here. So check it out again. It's free on Steam. Now back to the video. Okay, so let's address the elephant in the room. Why is it that Frost Mage is so good in the current raid? Well, the current raid has a lot of spread cleave, and basically it's aside from one hard boss, which is like the last boss, every fight is a spread cleave fight. Now, Frost Mage has comparable AoE and comparable single target to Arcane and Fire. However, it has free spread cleave. Like, you don't have to do anything special to get the spread cleave to work. Like, you can increase how much spread cleave you do by doing the tips that we're going to talk about in this video, but a lot of that just kind of comes with the spec. Now, on top of that, you also have double use of your barrier, double use of your ice cold, which is very, very powerful, especially if you're planning those out. Are they as valuable as having like a cheat death? Kind of depends on the fight, but I will say, like, overall, if you look at statistics, you can see that more fire mages are living throughout fights than frost and arcane mages. But in general, mage defensives are really, really bad. Now, you could say a lot of this comes down to pilot error, right? If you have more defensives, always, if you're like better at playing, you're always going to get more out of that than a cheat death. However, due to the nature of progression and even just farm in general, like early farm, having a cheat death is really good for whenever things go wrong and you get blindsided. And a lot of that time, it's not even something you did wrong. So, yeah, I don't really recommend playing fire, except for on Lura, that one boss. There's other bosses where it might be comparable early on, but who cares about those? But Frost is going to be a spec that you can play on every single boss in the raid and do well. It is just very, very overpowered compared to the other mage specs, and I'm honestly surprised that it didn't get nerfed more. In fact, I think we're still up from where it was previously before they did a couple hotfix things. So anyways, we're going to teach you how to get the most damage out of your Frost Mage. A lot of this stuff is going to be about, tech in terms of like targeting and understanding the interactions between the skills. But honestly, Frost Mage is like not that complicated. It's not that difficult. It's probably one of the easiest specs in the game to play. So if you're looking for a spec that does pretty good damage without you having to have a lot of mastery over the spec, Frost Mage is great, and you're at the right place because we're going to teach you how to play it. Okay, let's begin with a sample of how Frost Mage plays. So on the pull, you're going to be casting Frostbolt into Flurry, and you want that to hit as the boss is being pulled. Then you use your potions, trinkets, bloodlust, racials, all that good stuff, and immediately cast Ray of Frost. As that Ray of Frost is finishing channeling, the next thing you're going to do is move into your Frozen Orb, but you need to make room for the Fingers of Frost. So you're going to Ice Lance once, and then you're going to Frozen Orb, and then after that, you're going to proc another Fingers of Frost and Brain Freeze. You're going to use a Fingers of Frost next, and then you're going to use your Brain Freeze, and after that, you're basically just going to be using Ice Lance until you are less than 6 freeze. Once you hit less than 6 freeze, you're going to just rip your second Ray of Frost. You want to get to the second Ray of Frost earlier now, since we don't have the Glacial Spike anymore on the pre-pull. But yeah, basically the goal is to get to the second Ray of Frost and to have it mostly finished before the Glacial Spike comes back up. Now, if there's a knock or anything like that, you can always weave in one extra Flurry. And the amount of Ice Lances you might do might be variable. But anyway, so we're going to get to our second Ray of Frost right here. And then after this Ray of Frost, we're going to move on to basically using up our Fingers of Frost and then using Glacial Spike. So Ray of Frost always gives you 2 Fingers of Frost. You want to make sure you make room for your procs. So as you can see here, every time you do a Ray of Frost, you're always going to end with 2 Fingers of Frost. You want to use 1 Ice Lance just to get this proc freed up because you're currently sitting on 2 Fingers of Frost. And then that allows you to Glacial Spike. Now here's where question number 1 comes up. A super common question. Do I Glacial Spike if I'm at full freeze? The answer is yes. You're Glacial Spiking still at full freeze as long as you have room for a Fingers of Frost proc, which we do, right? So we're going to go ahead and use that. And also, just for the record, normally you would also have no Brain Freeze here either, okay? Because Brain Freeze, using that is a very high priority thing. So that also comes with it. Basically, you need to have room for whatever proc you could get from the Glacial Spike to make it worth it. But if you have room for those, it's definitely going to be worth it. Now you're going to notice this trend a lot as we talk through what's worth it to do in the priority. There's like a whole system of priority where you are kind of like playing around your procs first and foremost, and then playing around the generators for those procs, and then below that there's the whole freeze gameplay. So yeah, we'll talk more about it in just a little bit. I just wanted to give you a primer on Frost Mage. Now let's move on to the gear. All right, so gearing your Frost Mage is fairly straightforward. For the most part, you're just going to want as much crit and mastery as you can get your hands on. Now, stats are fluid, and they do fluctuate in terms of how much they're worth per point, and there are diminishing returns at certain points, but you shouldn't really be approaching that in a Season 1 of the expansion. Just for reference, though, for Critical Strike, it's going to be like 1,380, I believe, is where the DR is. Yeah, it's going to be really hard to get to that point. You don't really care to have it capped out. There's no amount of crit that you need to have. It's just that crit is generally your best stat. And it's definitely possible that mastery ends up being your best stat depending on the situation. It's also possible that haste is maybe pretty good, maybe comparable with your second best stat. But in general, for Frost Mage, you kind of want like a nice mixture, and you're trying to avoid versatility. So you can see here, I have 1,100 crit, I have 915 mastery, and I have 626 haste. And actually, for my sim, it says I should use the mastery flask. So, right, you can see how things fluctuate. It was crit before I had a little bit extra crit on here before I got my ring upgrade. But when it comes to your crafted gear, you're gonna probably want the staff. I mean, unless you have like a way to go do Mythic Raid and get one. Yeah, it's this staff right here. It's the crafted staff. I just have it with crit mastery. Because of the new system where you can upgrade your weapons further, you definitely want to have a 2-handed weapon. And so the staff is just like an easy way to get that done. Everyone has access to this. You don't have to go do the raid. If you do have access to the raid, you can always pick up one of these bad boys. This is the Mythic Staff from Lura. It has only mastery on it. And this could be comparable if I get it all the way upgraded and then further upgrade it. But I would have to move my embellishments. Just know, like, for 99.9% of people, just do the crafted staff and upgrade that. That's going to be the best way to go. And then when it comes to your embellishments, we're trying to avoid wearing the shoulders, but obviously it's going to depend on what pieces you have your 4-piece on, right? If you don't have like a lot of options, you just want to have like the best pieces, ideally like mid-track tier bonus, and then just your off piece is going to be your crafted piece. Later on, once I get more gear, I'm probably going to move this to a lower budget piece because it's going to be stuck 3 item levels lower than everything else, but that is a future me problem. For now, I would say just craft whatever off piece as your embellishment. And the embellishment is going to be the Arcana Weave Insight, not Arcana Weave as the set, okay? A lot of people asking this question. We're not talking about the set bonus for Arcana Weave. We're talking about the embellishment for Arcana Weave. And that is an item that you apply to a normal crafted piece to give it the bonus where it gives you int and it also gives your allies int. So just to be clear, that is the Arcana Weave lining that we have added to this item to make it the embellished piece. Now, when it comes to trinkets, ideally you have the Valgor's Final Stare and you have the Gaze of the Onseer. Unfortunately, mine is still champion track, so I'm not using that. And it's better for me to go a ribbon mid-track. But yeah, you really want the Gaze of the Onseer. It's very, very powerful. And the Valgor's Final Stare, also very powerful. Does kind of change how you play in a small way, but overall, this is kind of the setup you're looking for. So again, for jewelry, you're wanting crit mastery, crit mastery, crit mastery. Pretty much high crit on the jewelry is good to go there. And that will fix the rest of your gear, so it's easy to make your character have crit as your highest stat. Next up are the talents, and we're not going to cover all of these. You can always read the talents if you want to know more information. We're just going to cover the important stuff that leads to interactions that affect how you play the game. So on the Frost tree, this is the talent setup that I recommend for most bosses. There's only really one swap I would make, and that is Splintering Ray if you're doing the Paladin's boss. That's where it's like 3-target cleave, or if you're doing Mythic Plus, this talent is also quite good. Freezing Rain, I really wouldn't ever take in Raid, but you do have the option to take this in Mythic Plus. Personally, I'm not a fan of using Blizzard, but now that they nerf Shatter a little bit, I might actually try it out. If you were to take that, you would probably remove Frozen Touch and move it over to this slot right here. But in general, this is kind of the setup that you're rocking. So, most important talent is Fingers of Frost up here in the top right. Fingers of Frost is the parenthesis you see on your screen on your spell alert opacity. It tells you that you basically have a free Ice Lance. What this actually does is it makes it so that your next Ice Lance is going to shatter as if it had the maximum stacks of shatter that an Ice Lance normally would have. Normally that's 6, okay, but it can go up, and you can hold 2 of these charges. You're guaranteed to get 2 from your Ray of Frost. You're guaranteed to get 1 from your Frozen Orb, and you have a chance to proc it from your Frozen Orb ticks. You also have a chance to proc it from your Frostbolt, and there's other small ways that you might proc it. Basically, you get a lot of these, okay? This proc is fairly plentiful. And then the next most important buff we need to talk about is Brain Freeze, and this is kind of like a combo. So Brain Freeze gives you a proc that makes your flurry come off cooldown and does slightly more damage, but that's actually not what we care about too much. What we actually care about when it comes to Brain Freeze is actually this talent here, Thermal Void. So whenever you consume a Brain Freeze, it's not any flurry, right? It's specifically the one that has the spell alert opacity that looks like a little, roof on top of your character, right? Whenever you see that proc and you use a flurry, as a byproduct, you get a buff called Thermal Void. Thermal Void is going to make it so your next Ice Lance acts as if it shatters 12 instead of 6. Okay, so it effectively doubles the value. Now, if you hit a target that has freeze on it and you don't have a Fingers of Frost and you shatter your stacks there with the Thermal Void proc, it is going to eat up 12 of your free stacks on the target. What's even better than that is if you have Fingers of Frost as well. So if you pair these two together, basically what's going to happen is it's going to act as if you just shattered 12. So you get 12 free freeze, basically, converted into shatter without actually converting anything. It doesn't even have to be on the target, right? It just acts as if it was there. Very, very good combination to have. Now, if you don't have a Fingers of Frost to use with your Thermal Void, and you don't have a way to get one, you're still going to go ahead and spend it, okay? But if there's any way that we can try and fish for a Fingers of Frost, maybe with just like a single Frostbolt, or if you can use a spell like Frozen Orb that just came off cooldown, or Glacial Spike, which just came up to get a Fingers of Frost guaranteed on that, that's going to be great. But the big thing is just don't waste procs, right? So if you're in a situation where, basically you're like backed up, you have a Thermal Void and you have a Brain Freeze and you have all these other procs and your freeze is full, like just send the Ice Lance, okay? Don't try to game it too much. We'll talk about that more on the rotation side of things. Spellslinger is interesting as a hero talent. Basically what this does is it makes it so there's these little splinters that are constantly firing out your character. They come from Frostbolt, they come from Flurry, they come from your Frozen Orb ticking, that you get a lot of them from your Ray of Frost, and there's just like a ton of ways that these manifest, okay? But the important thing here is Splinter Storm. So whenever you use your Ray of Frost for the next 10 seconds, you're going to generate double splinters, okay? So that means that you have a lot of splinters flying at the target. Each one of those splinters gives you cooldown reduction on your Frozen Orb. They all reduce Frozen Orb by 0.25 seconds. Each one of those also has a chance to proc 8 splinters, so they basically Titan Forge, okay? And then all of the damage sources you have that which normally give you splinters, those are all increased. Now, splinters are also important because they do give you freeze as well. They have a chance to apply 1 stack of freezing. And with the sheer amount of splinters that you're going to have, especially right after your Ray of Frost, you're going to notice that suddenly you have a lot more freeze than you were expecting, right? Freeze is just going to constantly be going up on the target, even though you're trying to spend it. It's like a game of whack-a-mole. The freeze just keeps coming back up. So it's very important to understand the interaction here because the Splinter Storm talent giving you all of these splinters and having those splinters give you CDR on Orb means that if you ever have Ray of Frost and Orb kind of at the same time, you really don't want to sell the Orb, right? So Ray of Frost is variable. It has 2 charges, so you can hold one of them if you need to and you're not wasting any uptime. Whereas Frozen Orb needs to be sent pretty much right away, unless there's a good reason to not use it. And if you just used a Ray of Frost, or if you're about to use a Ray of Frost and your Frozen Orb is about to come up, it might make sense to try and get the Orb out first, right? Because you want to get the most out of the cooldown reduction on the Orb. Now, there's one last interaction here to cover, which is that whenever we consume a freeze with an Ice Lance, whenever we shatter one, it is going to reduce the cooldown of our Ray of Frost as well. Now, again, Ray of Frost has 2 charges, so we don't have to rush to get it out, but just be aware that Ray of Frost cooldown is not quite as long as it seems on the tooltip. It says 1 minute. It's actually less than that because Glaciate gives us that cooldown reduction every time we get a freeze. So just know that there's like a relationship between Frozen Orb cooldown and Ray of Frost, and also vice versa. And just know that whenever you have a bunch of splinters going out, that's when it's going to like really turbocharge your cooldown reduction. And then lastly, we have the engine for our spread cleave as a Frost Mage. So this is Fractured Frost. How this works is whenever you pressure Ice Lance, it's always going to shoot a second Ice Lance. It will not always go in front of you. It can even go back behind your character. It's going to seek out the target with the highest amount of free stacks. And what's important to note about this Ice Lance is it actually benefits from Fingers of Frost the same as your main Ice Lance does, right? So if you use Ice Lance with Fingers of Frost and it hits a target that has no free stacks whatsoever, right? You haven't casted any spells that apply freeze like Frostbolt or Flurry, Glacial Spike, any of those spells, right? It is still going to act as if it gave the full value there. This means that if you're standing where one target is 40 yards in front of you and one target is 40 yards behind you, so those targets are 80 yards apart, and you get the Fingers of Frost and you use an Ice Lance, both of those targets are taking full damage. Okay, so the only thing you have to do to have Spread Cleave as a Frost Mage, just like at the baseline, is just be between the targets so that your Ice Lance can reach them. And this is extremely powerful because you can force it onto specific targets if you know that you're going to get a whole bunch of Fingers of Frost procs soon with your cooldowns, right? You can kind of like prime a target to be like your secondary Ice Lance target. But yeah, that's all kind of in the min-maxing on the Spread Cleave portion of stuff. We actually talked about this in the previous video, and that is unchanged. This is somewhat simplified, but the rotation single target basically breaks down like this in your normal rotation, right after the opener. So at the top, you're making room for procs because you want to be using your cooldowns, right? So if you're at Fingers of Frost 2, you want to make sure you use one before you flurry. That way, if you proc one, you get it back. Like I said, not necessarily required in single target. I'm just saying to do it because it's better at 2 target. Also, if you have Brain Freeze and you don't have Thermal Void, then go ahead and use your Brain Freeze, right? Make room for another Brain Freeze proc. Below that, we have using our cooldowns. So that's going to be if you have 2 stacks of Ray of Frost for some reason, or you have a Frozen Orb or Glacial Spike just came up. Like you want to use those on cooldown. And then below that, we have using our procs. So that's going to be stuff like, like we talked about before, using Brain Freeze, using single Fingers of Frost, right? That sort of stuff. This is all above the line. And the line is representing like where you actually care about freeze at all. Now, of course, if there's like additional targets and you can do these things while also putting freeze on a separate target, that way you aren't overcapping on a single target, right? You're just swapping to whichever one has the least freeze. That's even better. But we're talking about here is just like single target strictly here. So anyways, moving on from there, we care about getting our freeze below 6, right? So that's where spending the freeze comes into play. And then below that, we have building. And so building could be Ray of Frost. It could be using a flurry without any proc, just like normal flurries. It could be using a Frostbolt if you have nothing better to do, okay? But in all of these cases, before you get down to the bottom here, like you should make sure you look at whatever you have available first, right? Any procs you have available, any cooldowns. And in the case of Ray, you want to try to have an empty bag. And what I mean by that is you don't have any procs in your hands, and ideally the target is below 6 freeze. Now, of course, if there's a second target, you could just swap to the other target and use your Ray of Frost there, and that is great. But try to space out your Ray of Frost on the opener. Roughly like 10 seconds or so is where you get the double splinter effect, right? So like generally speaking, like your second Ray of Frost, if you use your first one basically on the pull, it should be coming up around like 13 seconds-ish, something like that, unless you're saving it for later. But yeah, we want to empty the bag before we use Ray of Frost because we want to get the most out of it. Ray of Frost is a builder first and foremost. Yes, it does give us a lot of procs. Yes, it does have all these other interactions, but it is a builder, and we want to put it on a nice target that's going to be able to hold the freeze and allow us to get the freeze out before the target dies. So if you Ray of Frost a mob and it's about to die, that's really bad, right? Because then the freeze stacks die with the target. So try to make sure it's a nice sturdy target. Try to make sure you don't have a bunch of stacks already on that target. Make sure you don't have any procs already as well. Don't overcap your Ray of Frost. And if there's a reason to hold your Ray for a specific damage event, be it cleave or AoE or a damage amp, or maybe you have like a potion or something like that, that's like 90% of the time you're going to be having your Rays kind of like set in a certain point in the fight where either movement is easier or it makes more sense for AoE throughput. But again, in single target, this is kind of the gist of it. This is like really all you have to worry about is just make sure you aren't capped on procs, right? Use the cooldown so that you can get the procs and get the cooldowns on cooldown. Spend the procs. And then we have the freeze gameplay beneath that. You do want to track your freeze. And if you're wondering about my UI, because I do have like a really nice freeze tracker, this is CD Flow is the name of the add-on. I have an import in my Discord. It's a little bit, most people have no trouble setting this up, but some people have a lot of trouble setting it up. If you just go to my Discord UI setup channel where the import is there, you just get the profile and you do it properly, it will show up. But yeah, basically it gives you this bar and it shows you like blue whenever you have above 6, and it goes deep blue whenever you have like more than 2. And I like this a lot because instead of having to look at the icon and like the tiny number on the freeze, right? I can just see this out of my peripheral vision. And that way, you know, the freeze is secondary in the rotation. It's also secondary in how we're playing, but we do want to have visibility on it. And ideally visibility where it's like super obvious. You don't have to look at a little icon or read a small number to see where it is. All right, so moving on from there, let's talk about the Frost Mage opener again. And let's also discuss the normal rotation and what you would do to change it if there's, for instance, spread cleave happening soon, like ads are spawning in, or if there's persistent 2-target cleave. So we're going to use Bellerin as our example here. This is Mythic Bellerin, and as you can see, I'm casting the Frostbolt for the pull, and my goal is to have the Frostbolt and the Flurry basically come out of my hands as the boss is being pulled here. So here, let's talk about the first thing that you might you might notice here. So on the opener, I did my Frostbolt and the Flurry, and I did get a Thermal Void proc from a Brain Freeze. So this can happen, right? Your Frostbolt that you precast can proc Brain Freeze and instantly give you Thermal Void without you actually seeing the Brain Freeze. It can happen basically at the same time because you queued the Flurry from the Frostbolt. So if that happens, you actually don't change anything with the opener I gave you, right? Because we're going to be using our Ray of Frost. And then after the Ray of Frost, we're making room for the Ice Lance, you know, so that we can use the Frozen Orb. And then after the Frozen Orb, once we have 2 Fingers of Frost, we're going to use an Ice Lance again. So here you can see I'm Ray of Frosting. This Thermal Void is going to stay up until I use an Ice Lance here. It's actually about to expire in 3 seconds, but that's fine because we're going to Ice Lance here anyways, right? Ray of Frost just ended, so it's going to be an Ice Lance. And then we're going to use Frozen Orb, which is going to give us Brain Freeze and Fingers of Frost again. And then here we would use an Ice Lance first to free up the slot for Fingers of Frost and then Brain Freeze. The reason why there's a difference here, I'm just teaching people this now as like the standardized way of doing it because technically the difference in single target between using Flurry or Ice Lance here is like very minimal. Kind of doesn't matter. But if there's ever 2 targets, then it's better to do the Ice Lance first because you have a higher chance to proc Fingers of Frost. And also, it's better for like standardizing things, right? Like if you had a Thermal Void proc or something like that, using the Ice Lance first will always ensure that you clear out that proc first before you get to your Brain Freeze. So it's just like a better practice thing. Like just get in the habit of doing this, right? So anytime you have both procs, you're going to use the Ice Lance first and then the Flurry. Let's say, for instance, that I didn't have 2 Fingers of Frost here, right? I just have 1 Fingers of Frost and a Flurry. In that case, I would Flurry first and then I would Ice Lance, right? But if you have 2 of them, then it's going to be Fingers of Frost first and then Flurry second. Okay? This is like the only complicated thing about Frost is just paying attention to if you have 2 Fingers of Frost in a Brain Freeze or 1 Fingers of Frost in a Brain Freeze. Okay. Anyway, so we're going to Ice Lance here and then we're going to use our Flurry. And then you'll notice that I didn't actually use my Trinket and my Orc Racial here on the pull. I'll explain why that is in just a little bit. Yeah, so here we have our first mechanic coming up. Now, the way we do this boss now is I don't have to do the soaks anymore, so you're not going to see me actually go out soaking, even though I have a timer for that. That's how it was for Prague, so just ignore that. Okay, so ads are spawning, right? We've got these birds in the air. We've got a bird over here, and then we've got another void bird that's like off screen over here, okay? It always spawns kind of like over here on this side or in the back. Just be aware of where the birds spawn. One thing that's interesting about this fight is you can actually hit the birds ahead of time. Like right here, I could actually attack the bird. I don't want to do that though. Okay, I'm not hard targeting the birds. I will target the eggs, but not the birds. But the reason why I'm pointing this out is because the birds are going to fly to where the soaks are. We know where the soaks are going. If you're familiar with the strategy on this fight, you'll already know. If the line spawns here, you go behind the line. If the line spawns on this wall, you go behind the line over here. So depending on where this spawns, I'm going to position differently because my goal is to make sure that every Ice Lance I do with Fingers of Frost, you could actually see it here flying out. Every time I hit the boss with one, I want to make sure my second one is in range to hit a bird. Okay, so if I was like way out of position here, my second Ice Lance might be out of range. And that is no good. We don't want that. So we want to make sure that we are standing so that we can always hit the birds. And then the soaks are going out here. So the birds are going to land where the soaks are going. You'll see it in just a moment here. And you notice I do use my Ray of Frost. We'll talk about that in just a second. But let me finish this thought here. So the birds are going to land in the circle right here as their dive ends. Boom. Okay. So this is like kind of the position you want, right? Like whenever you're playing as a Frost Mage, I want you to always think about your positioning as a triangle. So you have the boss as one side, you have whatever adds might spawn as the other point, and then you're the third point. You always want to be in between the two. That way your ice lances can cleave both and you're never going to be out of range on them. This is going to be something that you want to just think about in every fight that you do. Always try to stand. You don't have to be exactly in the middle, right? Just make sure that you're in range of both the birds, the little birds, and the big bird. And this is also important for kicks here, but you know, that's another conversation. Yeah, okay. So why did I wait to use everything and Ray of Frost here as the birds are landing? This is just like a trick to get more AoE damage out. So whenever you have adds about to spawn, your goal is to basically get a bunch of Fingers of Frost if you can get those procs right then and there. Ray of Frost is not something you have to use exactly as it comes up. You can have 2 charges of it. So since you can have 2 charges, you have a little bit of a choice in when you use the charge. So that's why I'm going to choose to put it on the birds. And you notice that I always Ray of Frost with the birds because I always want to have 2 Fingers of Frost as the birds are spawning. That means I get double value on these Fingers of Frost whenever I send them right. Boom, hitting the bird there. You can see the damage hitting the bird. Another one is going out right now. And that's also cleaving right there. That is great. Now, this also does damage to the boss in addition to the bird, right? So, like, if the bird is here and the boss is here, and I do an Ice Lance, and it hits both of the targets. I didn't talk about this on the talents earlier, but there is something happening here. So you have a talent called Frostbite. This is going to make it so that your freeze actually does additional AoE damage around it. Frostbite can hit this bird, and then the bird's Frostbite will hit the boss back. It's not a ton of damage, but it is something that is worth noting. Anyways. So that's the goal, right? Basically, we want to just make sure we use as much Fingers of Frost as possible. So that means using any procs as they come up. You notice the Glacial Spike came up. I'm already casting the Glacial Spike instantly. And then I'm going to be moving out with this mechanic here because someone is soaking for me. I'm just going to be running and kind of backpulling out of the circle as I go. Someone else is going to soak it up here. So we're good. And the goal is just whenever there is AoE present, especially if the AoE is not up the entire fight, if it's only in short bursts, your goal as a Frost Mage, if you want to do good damage, should be to try and seize the AoE damage for yourself. AoE damage is a zero-sum game. There's only so much HP on these little birds before they're gone, okay? And as a Frost Mage, your job in this fight is not necessarily to do the highest egg damage. In fact, they nerfed this fight, so now it's 40 seconds on the egg. So it's not necessarily about having the most boss damage. It's about getting to the egg consistently, both phase 1 and phase 2. A big part of that is just making sure that you deal more damage to the eggs and to the birds. So Frost Mage kind of carries that role in this fight. So that's why we're doing it, and it's not entirely pad. There are like other reasons why it's useful. But essentially the idea is like whenever you have targets stacked, that's great because your Glacial Spike and your Frostbolt are going to be applying freeze to multiple targets. And even if they're spread out, that's great too. You can cleave those spread out targets. You can either have them be next to each other, right? So that you get a little bit more Frostbite, or it could be a priority target back there that you need to just mark with some freeze text so that you constantly Ice Lance it with your Fingers of Frost. But you just want to generate the Fingers of Frost, choose to generate them when the ads are going to be up. That's why we try to sync our Ray with like the ads spawning as the Ray is ending. Now, in addition to that, we also don't want to be sitting on Glacial Spike or Orb, right? So Glacial Spike is going to happen every time you get 5 icicles. It's just on the timer. Okay, and you can track the buff for icicles, so that way you know whenever you're about to reach 5. Ideally, you're never hitting 5 like as a Ray of Frost is ending. You want your Ray of Frost to be separate from that, so that maybe you're moving on from the Ray of Frost to Glacial Spike, or you're getting out your Glacial Spike and then you're using the Ray of Frost. Essentially, we just want to avoid sitting on a Glacial Spike. A Glacial Spike is infinitely more useful than a Frostbolt. It does a ton more damage. It gives you guaranteed Fingers of Frost. And it is just like way better in general. So just, focus on getting your procs basically on cooldown. We don't care if the target already has max freeze with Glacial Spike. Okay, but if there is another target that's going to live long enough for you to use up the freeze that you could swap to, go ahead and swap to that target, right? That's a good idea because then you can get freeze on additional targets. And if you sprout your freeze and you have it on multiple bosses, that's generally going to be better than if you just stick to one target. So examples of this would be like the Paladin's bosses. So on the Paladin bosses, you always have 3 targets, but one is going to be out sometimes. So essentially it's like 2 target cleave. Okay, kind of similar to the dragon fight. So whenever you're starting this fight, you know, you're doing the same opener like we talked about. So you see me doing it here. And then what I'm going to start doing is swapping over to a different target kind of early on. And you'll notice that I'm actually building here on this target before I spend. So just like a general thing, if you are in a situation where there's persistent 2 target cleave, okay, 2 or more, what you want to do is try to make it so every Ice Lance you do is hitting 2 targets for 6 freeze instead of just 1 target for 6 freeze. So let's imagine the scenario, right? Let's imagine scenario 1 is there's 2 targets here, okay? And one target has 6 freeze and the other target has 6 freeze. That's ideal. But let's imagine scenario 2. Target 1 has 12 freeze and target 2 has 0 freeze. If you Ice Lance here, you're getting basically half the value per Ice Lance, right? You'd have to do 2 Ice Lances here to get the same damage as the first example where it was 6 and 6. So unless you have a proc, you're going to try to basically build on 2 targets. Make sure you have 2 targets with at least 6 freeze before you send a non-proc Ice Lance. So that's like a persistent goal here. Now, obviously, if a target is running out, you don't want to put a bunch of freeze on them before they go out. You'll notice there's a lot of incidental freeze that's happening. Try to swap targets whenever you see the freeze kind of maxing out. Your goal is to try and swap between the targets so that you're always looking at the target with like the least amount of freeze of the 2 that you want to cleave on. And in this fight specifically, it goes in order from top to bottom. So this boss goes out first, and then Commander goes out, and then War Chaplain. So you can just cycle between the 2 that you know are not leaving, or the easier way to think about it is just basically always swap to the guy who came back in, okay? You always want to start on the Commander guy because he has a damage buff on the pole, but after that, you want to swap to the target who just came right back in, okay? Anyways, yeah, just trying to make sure that you aren't Ice Lancing, unless it's like for movement. Like here I'm doing the Ice Lance for movement, so I didn't put freeze on the other guy, but like ideally for damage, I would always keep them stacked up so that, you know, all of my Ice Lancers are always getting full value. 12 stacks of freeze without any procs. That is what we're looking for. Now, same thing goes for the Dragon's boss. So whenever you start the pull and you do your whole opener, this is before the patch, so the opener might be a little different, but the concept here I'm trying to show is the same. So like whenever you start applying your freeze to the first dragon, swap to the other dragon, the one you want to actually be on if you're doing like Gloom 1 and other assignments. That way you're kind of working on its freeze at the same time, because you'd see here the entire time, like this other dragon, all of these extra freeze that I've gotten would be overflow. Like if we just go a little bit back, right? You can see here 12 and 20. Like that would have just been 12 wasted freeze had I not swapped targets right away. So make sure that you're swapping targets to make sure that you keep both dragons above 6 so that whenever you spin the Ice Lance again, you're always using up 6 freeze. That's our goal, unless it's for like movement or something like that. All right, and that is pretty much it for today. So just make sure that you're doing the opener just a little bit differently. And also make sure that you are following my guidelines when it comes to the spread cleave. Try and sync up your Ray of Frost with the AoE. You can also consider how Frozen Orb is coming out too. I'm just showing an example here on Lura as Frost. You know, I did kill this as Fire for my first kill, but I decided to try out Frost as well, just to see the difference. I did prog a little bit as Frost before, but essentially the idea on this one is, you know, because there's like these AoE moments and the rest of the fight single target, you can hold the orb just a little bit to try and force it into the AoE scenario. Again, I don't recommend holding orb too long. Like there's definitely like a situation where you're just sitting on too much CDR to the point where your orb cooldown would have been up already, or a good portion of it could be up already. But if it seems to be kind of lining up with the AoE just naturally, you know, feel free to hold on to it for a couple seconds, or sequence your opener just slightly differently so that you can get the value on that. Example, that would be Crown. If you're doing Crown of the Cosmos, maybe open with the orb first, Ray Frost later, because there's a stacking damage amp. As you can see, there's a lot of like nuance to when you put out the damage, but really like the important thing is just understanding how this all fits together. A good example here. Okay, so ads are coming up soon here, and my Ray of Frost is ready, and my orb is on cooldown, like 20 seconds, right? So if I start a Ray of Frost right here with this Termination Prism, my Frozen Orb is going to come up really, really quickly. So I get my kick here, and I finish my Ray, and then right here, boom, we have the AoE, and look, orb came up, right? That was not 20 seconds. Okay, so you have to think about in your head like how these things can turbocharge the cooldown of each other such that you can make sure that the orb is on time, make sure the procs are happening when you want them, And really, like, the bottom line of Frost Mage is that it's very easy to play in single target. The whole skill expression is in how you get the AoE damage out, and that mostly comes down to like getting your procs at the right time, like forcing the procs into certain scenarios just by sequencing things ever so slightly different. So anyways, if you want more information on the spread cleave stuff, again, you can check out my previous video. I'll have it at the end of the video. It's going to link to that, and also an info card up here. And that's going to be it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your patience. I know I've been very busy and not uploading as much as I used to. But been just kind of busy in my life with my daughter. So anyways, that's going to be it for today. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.